hit this go live button. And here we go. We are live. Welcome back to the Government Coins podcast. Listen, y'all, this is episode 4. And season 3 has been off to a really good start. And I'm so excited to be here and to also have this latest guest on the podcast, because we get people reaching out to us all the time and asking us, does the government how do I do business with, the Department of Education, or does the government work with people who provide training, or how can I get my program into schools and things like that? So we brought somebody on who's an expert in this space, and they work directly for the agency, and they can speak exactly to what the agency is spending money on. So without further ado, Calvin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So excited to have you, and thank you so much for accepting our invitation to come on, because we know your day is full of different tasks, so we want to definitely hop into it. Let the people know a little bit about you, where you're from, and some of the work that you do as well.
All right, fantastic. My name is Calvin Mitchell. I am the director of the Office of Small Disadvantaged Business Utilization. I was appointed as a senior executive into this role over a year and a half ago. Before that, I was acting in the position. So acting like I had the position, basically. No, I was acting in the position. And before that role, I was the deputy director of contracts and acquisition management. My whole entire career has been in government contracting.
Wow.
Spent a lot of time in general service administration, working with other agencies on contracting. So I got to know category management, got to know supply chain risk, and some other things that were government-wide initiatives pretty well. And during that time, I had the opportunity to go to Congress. And so while in Congress, I supported Congressman Benny Thompson in the Homeland Security Committee, looking at disaster contracts. So the support the government was given to Puerto Rico during Hurricane Maria, the detention center contracts, all those contracts I was looking at. I worked directly with him and consulted with him on giving him some guidance as to what to do from a contractual standpoint, because their whole oversight was Department of Homeland Security. And he actually lended me out to the small business committee. So I did some work with the small business committee. We got 2 bills out of there.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it was a pretty exciting time. And so before General Service Administration, worked for the Army Corps of Engineers in policy. And some people don't like policy, but I'm one of those weird people who actually love policy. So I did a lot of work there. And then had some leadership positions around the Army Corps of Engineers, and then started my career with the Army Contracting Command, where it was kind of cool. We were buying weapon systems. So anything that went boom was what I was buying. But not everything was boom. They had a program called Less Than Lethal, which I still chuckle about now. How something can be less than lethal. I figure either it's lethal or not lethal, right? Not less than legal. But
I want to hear about this.
All weapon systems. All right. So yeah, I could tell you some funny stories about that. But yeah, so that's kind of my career in a nutshell. And in my role now, I work directly for the Deputy Secretary, Cindy Martin, and I'm basically helping the department meet and exceed their small business goals. And so we do it through training, we do it through outreach. Right now, I'm at the Women-Owned Small Business Conference in Silver Spring, Maryland. We're meeting one-on-one with several women-owned small businesses. But this is kind of outreach we do in this role, and really just making sure we reduce barriers for small business and making sure that small businesses get an opportunity at some of these federal government dollars. Federal government spends over $60 billion a year in federal contracting. And last year,
$60 billion.
$60 billion. I'm sorry, $600 billion
Yeah.
and over 100 and 100 and about 140 billion went to small businesses last year. So there's a lot of opportunity within the federal government. Um, you think that's the gross domestic product of some countries is what we spend here in the States in contracts. So there's a lot of
Exactly.
opportunities for sure.
And that is a huge like statement within itself, because a lot of times we don't realize the number of opportunities that are available for small businesses. So the one thing that I would say is, for small businesses who are looking to get into this space, what are some of the type of products or services that you've seen the Department of Education purchase?
Yeah, so the Department of Education, we purchase a range of items. We spend about $2 billion, it's $2.7 billion usually is what we spend in contract dollars. That kind of fluctuates between 2.4 and 2.7 year over year. Most of our contracts are professional service contracts. So statistics, analytics, data analytics. There is some financial service management. There is acquisition support. Then there's also a lot of in the IT space, especially IT services, right? So someone doing software design, system design. There's a lot of core cyber government. Net zero. What is it? Zero trust is big.
Zero trust.
So everyone is there's a huge focus on cyber and IT. And so that's really where we are in terms of the department, in terms of our spending. Something that's kind of unique to the Department of Education, and a lot of people don't think about the research and development aspect of what education does. There is a huge focus on data analytics, on surveying, and that type of work, because that's how we influence the policy that helps us to develop what our programs are going to be for the Department of Education. So what is the impact of COVID on minority children, right? Is there any policy? So we're going to go out, we're going to study the population, figure out what's happening, and figure out through test scores and through surveys whether or not there has been an impact and a negative impact, and then developing policy subsequent to meet the needs of the student. So it's kind of just giving you a flavor of what we do here at the department.
Got it. Okay, it was starting to break up just a little bit, but we did hear the component of the research aspect of it. So would you say that that's the top, like the top NAICS code that the Department of Education spends on?
Oh, yeah. So the top NAICS code really is our financial management services. If you can imagine, federal student aid is one of our biggest programs. So that is where we spend the most of our dollars. So, but unfortunately, as you can imagine, not all of it is able to go to small business because it's just, that's your nail net, that's your, insert whoever large servicer might be. But there's also work that's done on the other side, which is the debt collection and some of the other work. So I would say a large majority of our spend that is eligible for small business would be in the general consulting. I would say the computer system design services. I would say research and development in social sciences and humanities. That's the studies, and so that's 541720. There is a lot that we do in the miscellaneous financial investment. That's 523999. And administrative management, which is a very common one, which is 541611.
Yeah, for sure. That's like a catch-all right there.
That's a catch-all, right?
That's a
Right,
catch-all
for basically all things professional services.
for
But
sure.
if I were to round it up, it would all fall into the professional services and IT service space.
Got it. Okay, so the top two. Someone is asking, does the Department of Education purchase textbooks directly?
No, no, and
No.
that's a very good question because a lot of times people think, and rightfully so, you would think that a lot of if I want something, if I want to get to something that impacts across the nation in terms of um, different various schools, hey, Department of Education might be a place to go. But a lot
Mhm.
of times, the Department of Education is kind of like a framework, right? And so that framework is developed, but the states are really the ones doing a lot of the execution. And it makes sense, right? Because certain states probably, New Hampshire may not want us calling the shots for them in the same way Texas might not want us calling the shots for them, right? So each state has a Department of Education, and each department um, of education at the state level is really the one responsible for textbooks, curriculum, even curriculum. A lot of people say, "Oh, hey, does I have this great curriculum program?" I always suggest, "Hey, go to the state and do it in the same way. If you're thinking about a capture strategy, what's the greatest impact? What are you? How do your services align? So on and so forth." So and and I'm glad that question came up early because that's something that's always kind of nuanced about the department, right? Because you think the department has a very national reach, but
Yeah.
in some ways, it doesn't force a policy or force initiatives or force especially contents or curriculum directly to states or
Got you.
territories.
Okay, and I think that's a good point to make. Just because a lot of it is very nuanced, like you said. Sometimes the states have certain things in place that you'll be able to go after. So I appreciate that response a lot because I was under the impression that, well, okay, well, let's talk about for different like to support military bases and things like that. Does the Department of Education manage those, or are they housed under a different area?
Different organization actually, and so so especially for the Department of Defense, they have the Department of Defense education activity, and they have responsibility over the military bases, both domestic and foreign. And so they are a separate organization, separate and apart from the Department of Education. But that's a good question.
Okay, perfect. I want to make sure I throw that one in there too, because I do have a few more. So another thing is, let's talk about well, you already told us the budget. So the Department of Education spends $2.7 billion
Yes.
Overall.
In contracts.
In contracts. Now, for that, how much of that would you say small businesses have received?
So out of that, we spend about 300 million in small business dollars.
Got it. And then does that usually meet the small business goal?
It does this year.
Okay.
So every year, and this is probably just good to know, every year, agencies are responsible for negotiating their small business goals with the Small Business Administration. And the Small Business Administration starts off with a proposal. And what they'll do is they'll look at our historical spend, and they'll say, Calvin, based on your historical spend, we're going to put a little padding on it because we always want you to increase. And we think that you can get to this number, right? And then I go and I look back at the requirements that we have that are scheduled for the current fiscal year. I'll look at the trends, dollar trends, and some contracts that may be aspiring, and try to determine whether or not we can meet that number. And then I'll do a counter proposal. So
Got it.
we've been on 14% for now 2 years.
Got it.
What's interesting and really good for your audience is I always say, look at the historical spend of an agency, right? Because people can interpret the data a couple of ways, right? If you looked at 2019, just before I got here, the department was doing over 30% contract was their goal for contracts. And they were exceeding that 30% goal year over year, right? Now we're at 14%. Half of our contracts, small business spend, is no longer there. And you may say, man, ever since Calvin got on there,
Calvin,
the numbers went down, right? Well, why they hire Calvin? Man, they got the wrong guy in the position.
Yeah.
But a couple of things happen. Couple of things happen. And that's why I say it's always good to know your customer. Always good to know your customer. And part of when you're trying to determine who you want to work with, know what their small business spend is. Go 5 years, at least 5 years, and look at how they're trending. So if you can Google, and I'm gonna reference Google multiple times here. If you say small business scorecard, education, small business scorecard, HHS, whoever you're looking up, you can look at the scorecard and you're going to see this scorecard. And I think it goes back to probably like 10 to 12 years. And you can see their small business spending and how they're doing in each socioeconomic category, right? So we recognize that everybody has a small business goal that's negotiated. And then there's a socioeconomic category that generally are by statute, right? So it's historically underutilized business zone, service disabled veteran-owned small business, women-owned small business, and a small disadvantaged business goal, which really is really meant now solely through the 8A program. And so those are the main goals that are previously were by statute. However, there was a change. And that change is M2203. I'm going to hold that though. And that memo actually changed our small disadvantaged business goal. So just remind me that I held that in place, and I'm going to pick it back up later because I want to answer the question. So what ended up happening with the Department of Education is the environment changed. The department said, hey, we want to change the way that we engage student borrowers, right? Mm-hmm. And so the next generation of financial aid was born. And that project consolidated some of the requirements that were desegregated, right? And so because they changed their business model, it kind of changed the way we were doing business. We had a small business, 100% small business set aside contract for debt collection services. Mm. At one time, we had over $100 million in small business going in that category. We had 12 contractors. Because of the volume of the customers, we actually graduated some of those businesses from the small business program. Mm. So it went from $700 million all the way down to $300 million because some of them phased out. So over nearly $500 million were unaccounted for in the numbers, even though small businesses were still being supported, but because they sized out, we were no longer able to capture them. Again, it talks to understanding the numbers, understanding the data, right? And that's kind of what happened. So it was going to be impossible for us to continue to get to that 30% mark anymore because the environment's changed. So when you're looking at agencies and you're trying to target the agencies, talk to them about, hey, what's changed in your data, right? Do you see dramatic increases, dramatic decreases? Talking to them so to help understand in the marketplace will also help you to identify potential opportunities.
Got it. Okay, so now here's another question in the midst of all of that. Because you consolidated all of those different departments or different areas, cut out. Goodness. Okay, he'll be back. But in the meantime, in between time, y'all make sure y'all drop some questions in the comment section. And don't forget to like this video because I see we have a few people who are watching, but make sure y'all like this video so that way we can definitely continue this engagement, and then it can also, let YouTube know that people are interested in our content. So don't forget to like this video. Calvin is back. He cut out for a second, but I was gonna ask you.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened.
No, it's fine. I know the Wi-Fi does that every now and then. So but I wanted to ask you a question about that in terms of being that you consolidated a lot of those different roles. Were you still allotted the same amount of money in terms of funding, even though you no longer had those requirements?
Yes. And so unfortunately, the dollars don't change, right? But the type of work changed. And so part of what I've been doing here at the department is looking at ways that we can find other opportunities within small business in the small business environment. Because, there are other opportunities that present themselves, and they happen in many different ways. One is looking at contracts that have traditionally gone to large businesses and really looking at that and say, dude, does it really make sense for this contract to go to a large business, right? And sometimes it's just been, hey, Calvin, we've been doing this for 20 years. There's been one,
Exactly.
right? This is all I've known. And then sometimes the contractor has more institutional knowledge than we do in the government because they've been there so long. So really challenging my program offices to really look at what they're doing and whether or not we're really making good decisions, because we know we do pay a more premium price oftentimes when we go to large businesses. So so on the one side, we've been able to fight against that, right? There's been at least 6 contracts that were going to really large firms that we were able to flip to small business set aside. One was a partial set aside to a small business. So when you're working with your agencies, make sure you're engaging them and asking, hey, even though there's an incumbent, what are the plans to move away from that platform and maybe create a small business set aside? You can do a total set aside or partial set aside. Either way will provide you with some opportunity. The second side of it is looking at some of these requirements that are bundled, right, or that are lumped together, and looking and saying, hey, does this really make sense that we're buying janitorial services and IT services in the same contract? Probably doesn't make sense, right? And not only that, we're probably paying a premium price, right? Because they have to still subcontract to get someone to do that work, right? So how can we decompose those contracts to make sure that we're getting the right niche contractor to do that work? Because a lot of times small businesses usually have they have a couple of things they're really awesome at, but the things that they're really awesome at, we want to maximize that.
Absolutely.
Right? If it's technology, if it's some kind of innovation, if it's some kind of subject matter expertise that they may be able to provide, we may not be able to get at it because it's baked in the layer cake, I say, of contractors. How can we pull out that layer so that we can solely focus on that skill set that we need? Right? We already know we're gonna reduce the price off the top, right? Because in the contractor's price, right, there's direct costs and there's indirect costs and there's direct costs. Indirect costs and
always cut out.
right. So we know that the indirect costs, all right, is the buildings and all these other things, right? So, and we know the direct costs are probably just the cost just for doing business, right? We already know that if we go from a large to a small, we're going to get significant savings because a large business isn't going to have all those layered costs, right? Small businesses aren't going to have that because they don't have those large businesses in those large buildings in Crystal City or in some of these other areas, right? Or even downtown on K Street, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Small businesses aren't going to have those high overhead costs, right? So we already know that we're going to save money. So if we can decompose some of those contracts, and that's what we're trying to do. And there's some of the questions we can ask. Okay, well, how can we reduce? How can we look at the work and just ask, hey, government, why are these requirements grouped together? Because if they weren't grouped together, there may be something I could bid on. So really
Mm,
pushing that needle and making sure that we can carve out those opportunities.
that is a really, I hope y'all wrote that down, because he just said whenever you find an opportunity that's bundled, ask that question. So that could be a way for you to get in, and that could allow these contracting officers to go back to the drawing board, like he was saying.
Yeah.
But to piggyback on that, I wanted to talk a little bit about those bigger companies and how many of those are actually have subcontracting plans in place, and how are they being managed, and how do subs locate these contract opportunities?
Yeah. And so any contract over 700,000 has to have a subcontracting plan. That subcontracting plan is negotiated between the agency, usually with the contracting officer and the contractor. So any large contract any contract over 700,000.
Uh-oh. Any contracts over 700,000, y'all heard that, it's gonna have a subcontracting plan in place. So right now we're just waiting to figure out from him, where are they posted on the Department of Education's website. And drop some more comments in the chat. I do see a few of them. Someone's asking about the top 5 micro products. So I guess in the things that they spend things that they spend through like micro purchases. So I'll definitely ask that question when he comes back on. And then also, do you need a website to source for the government? Source goods for the government? There we go. So he's back. But you definitely want to have a website to promote your business. And of course, it helps you to show up professionally. So let's put a pin in that, and we'll come back to that. Calvin, can you hear me?
Yeah, my deepest apologies. I've never have a call drop, and I've had 2 call drops in just today.
Know what you
My
mean?
deepest apologies. And what I'm doing right now is I'm putting this thing on Wi-Fi so
Oh,
I can make sure that I'm gonna try. Hopefully this works out for us.
no problem. Take your time. No.
So what was the last thing you heard before I exit
So
stage right?
we were, we were talking about subcontracting opportunities, and you were saying $700,000. Any contract over $700,000 has to have a subcontracting plan in place. So we were going to get into the conversation of how does a small business find those prime contractors with subcontracting plans for the Department of Education.
Yeah, absolutely. And so most agencies have what's called a active contract list. The active contract list gives us has all the contracts that have been awarded within the agency. So Department of Education, if you Google education active contract list, you'll get our active contract list. It's a spreadsheet. It gives you the contract number, the incumbent contractor, and a brief description. The good thing is you can always figure out a little more information if you Google the contract number. I know I'm doing a lot of Google, but look, it's easy to be
Hey, that's the
resourceful.
best way. That is the
And most
best
stuff
way.
is public information. Other things that I would suggest, even when you're not working with the department, one thing you could do is go to System for Award Management, and if you go in the search bar and you type in your NAICS code, you can search by NAICS code contracts that were awarded, and you have a time range in which you can search, right? Look at contracts that were awarded, who was awarded, because every time that there was a contract awarded, we have to specify who the awardee was, right? So you can always be able to look and say, oh well, this agency just awarded a contract to so and so, and I see this contract is above 700,000. You have to presume that they're going to have a subcontracting plan, right? And so now you won't know how well they're doing, but one thing you can see is, remember I told you to look at the small business scorecard of the agency, and where you can see how they're doing on their small business numbers. If you scroll down to the bottom, they also have what they're doing for subcontracting. You can see their subcontracting number. We also negotiate subcontracting goals. And
Got it.
in that, you can see by each socioeconomic category how the department has performed, right? And so if you're a women-owned small business, and you see that the Department of Education is missing their women-owned small business and the subcontracting, you can go and call the OSDBU director and say, hey, I know that you're that you have some goals for women-owned small business, and I see that you've missed those goals. So we want to try to figure out how we can get in with your prime contractors to possibly get an opportunity to partner with you and help you to meet those goals. Those are good ways to try to capture work.
Oh man, you're dropping all the gems. I'm hoping y'all picking them up over there. Please do, because this is definitely like critical information in terms of, finding your way into a space. So next question. So we're gonna leave the subcontracting opportunities alone for a second, but we do have two questions from the audience. One is, the federal dollars from the Department of Education go to nonprofits. So are there any grant programs or anything?
Yes, absolutely. The department is one of the largest grant institutions in the government. The amount of grant dollars we obligated are quite extensive. Unfortunately, I'm not a grants expert, but if you send me an email, I could get you in contact with the right folks. But grants are definitely another pathway. The grants team issues billions and billions of dollars in grants every year.
Got you. Okay, so definitely we will be reaching out to get someone on the podcast to talk a little bit more about that. But if you need to find grants, are all of the grants on grant.gov, or is there another process?
I would say that most of them would be on grants.gov. I'm pretty sure they are, because I think there's a requirement for them to place them there.
Okay. All right. So that was that one. And the next one is, now let's talk about businesses who are, startups. They have innovative solutions. How does a business who has something that the agency may not be looking for pitch their business in like an unsolicited proposal? Is that a process that the Department of Education is like taking on?
Yeah. So I'm going to say yes. We have an unsolicited proposal process. The unsolicited proposal process isn't always as I'll say lucrative as you may think it is, because it really is a process that's going through the contracting chain, when in reality, you should be pitching this idea to someone in the program management chain. And you may say to yourself, well, what's the difference, right? The government's a government. Well, the contracting people are receiving requirements and sourcing them out. The program managers are building the requirements and sourcing them out. So you need to get in front of the program managers, because they're going to be the ones that's going to be sourcing it out, right? Or working, passing it on to contracting to source it out, right? And they have the budget, right? So I say all the time that the best way when you have an innovative approach, if you can't go through the small business innovation research program, if you can't get through that way, the other best way is to talk to someone in the OSDBU office, the small disadvantaged business utilization office, and talk to them about what your innovation is, because it's what's going to happen. They're going to be your advocates, right? They're going to be able to introduce you to whomever may be able to be the right program manager to talk about not only your capabilities, but to talk about your technology. Because you're absolutely right. When we think about it, that innovation and all the good ideas aren't necessarily coming from the government, right? That the innovation, the emerging technology is really happening in the commercial space. So here's the thing: if I'm the government, how am I going to know what's innovative, right? How am I going to know what technology is coming unless I'm able to capture it from what industry is providing?
Got it. Okay. And then last one would be, some upcoming opportunities for the Department of Education. How do I find their forecasts of different opportunities that are coming up?
Yeah, every year through public law, we have to submit our forecast. Our forecast is always published, and we're kind of unique in some ways because every quarter we're revamping our forecast, we're updating our forecast and make sure our information is as complete as possible. It goes without saying, there's always errors in anything, but we try to have real-time information to provide so that you can see what's happening from year to year, or from each fiscal year to each fiscal, and each quarter to quarter, sorry, from each quarter to quarter, so you can kind of see as requirements either drop off or are awarded or what's happening. So our forecast, you can Google education forecast and it'll pop right up.
Gotcha.
Right now, it's not much on there. But usually between November and December, we have the new forecast updated.
Got it. Okay, so between November and December, and I actually just dropped the link in the chat for that one as well. So the forecast, y'all can go on there, take a look at the forecast, and see what opportunities may be available for you. We do have another question in the audience, and this one is related to logistics companies and how can they get in and do business with the Department of Education, and, for any products or moving things or any of those different. Are there any areas?
So we do have, we don't have a lot of logistics contracts. A lot of our logistics work is embedded in larger contracts. So that's part of what I've been looking at, because I know there is an industry there of people moving stuff, right? And so how are we able to decompose some of those requirements? But otherwise, I would say that there's a lot of subcontracting opportunities in logistics. The only other logistics contract that I know that we have is to like transportation of people, shuttle bus services.
Okay.
And the other one is if transportation of executives. But otherwise, we don't have a lot of logistics contracts like you might see in like Defense Logistics Agency, or maybe the Army, who has a lot of logistics, and they're moving a lot of stuff all over the country. We don't have those same type of requirements.
Okay. Perfect. Well, that is our last question for the day. Again, we definitely really appreciate you coming on and answering all these questions and sharing a little bit more about the agency. Calvin, can you hear me? I think it's frozen again.
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. It was frozen.
Oh no, are you serious?
Yeah, but it's all good.
Sorry.
Up anyway, but I definitely want to say thank you again for showing up and sharing this information. Is there any way, if a business is interested in doing business with the Department of Education, what is the best way to reach out to do business with your agency?
So it's calvin.mitchell@ed.gov.
Got it.
Or it's OSDBU@ed.gov. But just you can reach out directly to me, and I can answer any question you have. I have a team that you can work through too, but you can always reach out to me for sure.
Got it. Well, again, we really appreciate you. Thank you for coming on the Government Coins podcast. Everyone who's tuned in right now, thank y'all so much for tuning in. Do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe to our podcast. Share this video, and we will see you all next week for another episode. All right. Peace.